Good evening. We're here at the LA Chess Club Tuesday night lecture. My name is Mitch. I'm going to be doing some great short games in the history of chess. First game is Vienna, 1903. Mr. Kaldeg is white. Mr. Zeisel is black. E4, great opening move for white. Bishop out, queen out, sits on one of the four center squares, controls a center square. If it's good enough for white, black says it's good enough for me. Bishop out, queen out, sits on one of the four center squares, controls a center square. Knight f3, attacking the unguarded pawn. Black has a whole bunch of choices. He can play the Philidor defense, d6, so nowadays. Knight c6, we might go into a Ruy Lopez, all kinds of great stuff, and sure enough, black decides knight c6 is the most logical. Certainly defends the pawn at e5. Okay, bishop b4, attacking the very weak pawn at f7. So we may have a Gioco Piano. We don't know yet. It depends on what black's move is right now. And sure enough, bishop b4. Bishop c5. Okay, attacking the weak pawn at f2. So far it looks like a sort of symmetrical opening. Okay. Right now, white has a bunch of choices. It's sort of like, I guess, the Evans Gambit. And here we go. Invented by Captain Evans in the 1840s, and it's still viable today. White's going to give up this pawn, but he's going to have like 6 tempos in a row, and black's not going to be able to develop anymore for at least 6 moves. And white's going to be able to castle, develop some more pieces, all for this one little baby pawn. And so let's see how it goes. Sure enough, bishop takes. And of course, white immediately tempos the bishop, and the bishop has to decide where to go. He decided to go back here. I guess keep some pressure on this diagonal. White attacks in the center. Now, if you're black, you really have to think long and hard about this. Is it better to ignore it? Because he is attacking the pawn twice. You're only guarding it once. He's attacking it once, twice. So if you decide to develop a piece, you're going to lose with a tempo. You could bring the queen out and guard this a second time. Let's see how black handles this problem. He takes the pawn. Okay. Not too bad. All right, let's take a look. Great Morphy move. We mere mortals probably at this point would either take the pawn back.
You can't.
Oh, it's pinned.
Yep.
We can't take with the queen. Should we castle? How about take the pawn back with the knight? And then if the knight takes, queen takes.
Yeah, that's probably the best move, because otherwise he's going to fork your rook and king in the next move.
Well,
Again.
white decided to play queen to b3 and attack f7.
Wow.
I like that. He's saying immediately, I'm going to keep you from castling. If I take this pawn, say check, your king is going to have to move. I sort of like that. Wow. Queen, knight 3. Queen, 3. Okay. Queen out. Discards the pawn a second time, right? So let's get rid of the queen. Let's tempo the queen. Well, we can't have that, so the knight will just take. Knight takes knight, saying, go ahead, say check. I'll renew my threat here. So I would say queen has to take knight check, right? And that's what he does. So let's see, what can white do? He can't castle and check. He can't block. He could retreat the bishop and keep his castling privilege. He just moves away. And I think he's thinking that he's going to bring the rook over here pin the queen to the king and win the queen. So rook e1 is the move, right? So he's put a lot of pressure on black right away. Queen over, check. Now bishop back, because he's got a tempo on the queen. Blocks the check and tempos the queen. Queen back, attacking the pawn. This is a real interesting game. Rook over to e1, threatening what kind of check? Discovered check, correct. And we're going to win the queen, because this bishop can go here, and we're going to win the queen for at least a rook. So I think black has to take some precautions right now. What happens if he moves the knight to block? Does that do any good? Interesting. Black moved the king over also. Isn't that strange? Wow. White develops a piece. Bishop to a3. Black getting ready to develop his light squared bishop. Put a little more protection on the king on the d file. Queen to b5, attacking the bishop and threatening, I think, a discovered checkmate here. When the bishop moves, the queen will be able to come here and say checkmate, protected by the rook. So he's setting up, so if he tries to save the bishop by just moving back, he can move this thing over here, I guess, and attack the queen, and we're going to win the queen, at least. That was a very nice move. Queen here saying, let's trade. It's protected by the bishop. I don't think it's going to work. White announced mate in 3.
Queen sack.
Yes, that's the first move. Queen sacrifice is the first move. Queen to e8 check. What is black's only move? King takes queen.
Bishop to g4.
Bishop to b5. Double check. Rook and bishop. You don't have a choice, right? Here. Morphy mate.
Wow.
Remember, Morphy with the Opera House game did the bishop over here and the rook here and the king here. Very similar. Very similar in the back rank. So that bishop and rook combination again with the queen sacrifice too. Very similar to the Opera House game in a way. Okay? Not bad. Not bad at all. Okay. Let's set it up. We'll go back. That was a that game was a lot of fun. Okay. You see, everybody was doing everything they're supposed to do in the first 6 moves, and then all of a sudden, boom. All right, in The Hague, 1928, Mr. Chiron is black. Mr. Saporka is white. Mr. Saporka starts d4. A great opening move for the Grandmasters. Slow, steady build-up. Black says, why not me too? d4, d5. And c4, and I think we have a classic Queen's Gambit. I don't have to take you. You take me and I'll take back. Okay. Knight f3. Capablanca used to play this against the Queen's Gambit all the time. Knight f6. Looks like we have quick development on both sides. Everybody's following the principles of chess. Knight c3. Knights before bishops. Pawn takes pawn. Looks like a free pawn. And of course, to stop this pawn from protecting this pawn, holding on to it. So black really can't hold on to this pawn. He's just got to be ready to give it back at the right time and know that he must give it back. Okay? He cannot hold on to it. Queenside development before kingside development. I'm not so sure that that's the way to go. Bishop to f5. Moving the same piece twice in the opening before developing another piece. But let's see what he's trying to do with this move. He's trying to get his pawn back. Okay. Pawn to e6. Ooh. Pawn to f3. I don't think it's a wise idea to push these pawns until after you've castled. I understand that he wants to keep the knight out. And that's why he pushed the pawn to take away the squares for the knight. But this is still rather dangerous because this knight moves away and this queen's going to come in for a very dangerous check. And I just don't like it right now. To me, it's just not correct. Bishop to b4, doing what? Pinning this knight to the king, an absolute pin. Attacking the light squared bishop, and a very pretty pawn chain. Very nice chain of pawns. And so, because of this pawn push and this pin, black says, time to sacrifice. Bishop takes pawn. The knight certainly can't take back. And if the pawn takes back, this knight will take the pawn, and you will open up this diagonal for the queen. And if you try to block it with this pawn, the knight's sitting here, the knight will just come and take the pawn. And if the pawn takes the knight, the queen will take the rook. So all because of this pawn push, black is able to sacrifice this bishop if, in fact, white wants it. And sure enough, he says, thank you. I'll gobble that bishop. Thank you very much. The knight takes, just like I said. And the queen comes out. Now if black checks here, he can block with either the queen. Well, he can't block with the queen, but he could block with the pawn. So counterattack, which is answered by counterattack. Wow. So bishop takes pawn, pawn takes bishop, queen. Okay, queen takes pawn. Whoop, here we go. Queen out in the middle of the board. Queen takes pawn check, guarded by the knight. King to d8, the only move. Not a good idea to go pawn hunting during mating attacks, whether you're conducting it or it's being conducted against you. But sure enough, white gets greedy and decides to go for a pawn. It says, looks good as the rook is attacked, but check. Pawn takes. Check, guarded by the knight, almost like this check over here, right? The problem is mate. Black was able to do this because of this pawn push. You should not push any of the pawns around your king till after you've castled. This is not a good idea. Okay, maybe h3 if you have to keep a bishop from a pin. But this pawn should never be pushed until after you've castled, unless, of course, you're playing the bird's opening and white starts with f4. And it's an entirely different dynamic. But it was all because white pushed b3 here. It's just too dangerous. It just opens up all these easily taken advantage of diagonals and files. And then you can't castle, and it's a mess. Chess has not, the dynamic hasn't changed, in 150 years. And I don't think anybody's going to come along and change the dynamic of the game. I mean, I think the last major theories to come in were from Morphy, which was quick development, even if you have to sacrifice 2 pawns or a piece. Get those pieces out ASAP, and you can create all of these incredible scenarios with sacrifices and queen sacrifices and everything, but only if you got the pieces on the board to do it. If you're pushing pawns in the first 8 to 10 moves, you can't create those. And those are what everybody loves, okay? Everybody loves, okay? All right. New York City, Mr. Richardson is white, Mr. Delmar is black. E4, E5, we've seen this opening before. And instead of knight out, bishop C4 right away, attacking the very weak F7 pawn. Knight F6, attacking the unguarded E4 pawn. White says, you take my pawn, I'll take your pawn, and threaten the fried liver attack at F7 because I'll have my knight and my bishop on it. So go ahead. Sure enough, black says, I'm taken. You gave me a free pawn, I'm taken. And instead of coming here or here, because this knight will come back and guard the square and at the same time attack the bishop, white decides to develop another piece. He's now got 3 against 1, and he's attacking this. And if the knight takes, then it can't go back here and stop the fried liver attack after it's taken. So let's take a look. Aha! The knight takes the weak pawn at F2. So basically what black is saying, it's worth it to me for 1 point. You can get 3. I've already got this pawn and this pawn, so I got 2 points, and I prevented your king from castling, which has got to be worth at least 2 points. So I might even be ahead in power. 4-3. Sure enough, the king takes the knight. These are fun games now, guys. Okay, is it going to be enough? Black develops very quickly with a check. Nice little tempo. White decides to block. Black takes the pawn and tempos the knight, threatens a discovered check, winning the knight for free. But white gets his check in first. King moves over. Knight attacks the bishop, so if the pawn moves, the discovered check, he'll just stop it and take the bishop. So the bishop moves back, renewing the threat of the free pawn move. Queen to D3. Look at that. The pawn can't move. He's blocked it. What a beautiful, beautiful move to block the discovered check. Okay? And now we have a very pretty pawn fork on the white pieces. Now remember, black gave up a knight to keep the king from castling, and he did have 2 pawns for it. Now he's going to try to get his piece back and still be up the 2 pawns. Let's see if that works. Well, since this king has moved, white gets a tempo with check. The king just moves away from the check. Bishop takes d5. What could possibly be the motive for this? If the queen takes, we have a fork with the knight, check, and the queen, and once the pawn takes, are we going to be able to do a checkmate with the bishop here and the queen here? That would open up the king. Okay, let's take a look. That looks sort of like what's going to happen. So the queen gets off the back rank, taking the bishop. And sure enough, knight check at f6. The pawn certainly has to take. Wow. There it is. Queen sacrifice. The only move.
Bishop and then rook.
Bishop check. Rook, king has to go back because there's nothing here, and you can't go over here because of this rook, right? So the king had to go back, and now you have your Morphy mate again. You could see it coming. Couldn't you see it coming? You could sort of see, you know, all of the stuff that was happening. Wow. They don't play like this anymore, guys. You don't see this too much anymore. I think there was a game about 15 years ago, Shabalov and an IM, where he did this to him. I can't, Watson, John Watson, I think. But it's just amazing the way that they can get away with this stuff over and over and over and over again. All right, that's a quick 3. Let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and do 3 more.